When it comes to Albert Einstein, a well-known scientist, and most of us are familiar with the truth that he was one of the greatest scientists for centuries. However, today in this conversation, it's crucial that we need to examine another aspect of his life which related to spirituality. Come to think of it today, that when we think about this debate between science and spirituality, some experts believe that this conversation or this debate could last forever, and given the fact that we all come from different paths of life. However, when it comes to Albert Einstein, it's not just about the debate, it's something more than that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, and who is the Dr. Kieran Fox. Dr. Fox is a neuroscientist and a doctor, and currently training to be a psychiatrist in the Research Residence Training Program at the University of California, San Francisco. And his research over the next few years will focus on the neural mechanism and clinical potential of psychedelic medicines. And of course, he just came out with his brand new book. It's called I Am Part of Infinity, The Spiritual Journey of Albert Einstein. Well, Kieran, and welcome to The Missing Piece.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Will. Thanks for the intro.
Well, Kieran, again, as I mentioned in the intro, when it comes to Albert Einstein, majority of us, or the entire world, understand that he was one of the most profound and also celebrated scientists. But when it comes to spirituality, that we have never, or even say, yeah, quite frankly, that we don't really hear a lot. So the first question I want to toss to you is, what inspired you to write a book about Albert Einstein's spiritual journey, and how does that relate to his scientific passion or the journey and dedication to the scientific field?
Yeah, great question. It really came from a personal place. I'm also, a scientist, a neuroscientist, doing medical research, but always had the spiritual side as well. I got into meditation very early on in life, like when I was 18, and, explored lucid dreaming and this kind of thing. Lived in India and Nepal for quite a while, really practicing the sort of contemplative life. And so for me, there was never a conflict there. It was always kind of, how can I merge those things together? And a lot of my research actually focused specifically on meditation. So really trying to study, turn science loose on these spiritual practices. So I was kind of looking for a long time for some other examples, other people who had made this work, or some kind of worldview that put these two things together, and didn't see them as a conflict. And I didn't find that in, Buddhism, which is what I was practicing. And I certainly didn't find it just in the scientific realm. But I had been reading, very broadly, trying to find, is there someone else who sort of had these same thoughts, or someone else who's made this work? And I actually mentioned it in the introduction to the book that I came across this book called Quantum Questions, which was edited by Ken Wilber. Many people probably know, a philosopher. And it was actually writings from the quantum physicists, including Einstein, people who really founded modern physics at the turn of the 20th century. And it was, with a bit of introduction, it was just their own writings. And these were very mystical writings about feelings of oneness, feeling attuned to the universe, this kind of thing. And I saw Einstein's writings, and then I said, this is perfect. I need to know more. And this guy, everyone, like you said, everyone knows him, but no one seems to know about this. And I'd never heard about this side of him. So it just sort of became an irresistible path that I just had to go down and figure out, what did he believe, and where did these ideas come from, and, how did he integrate them? And that's what the whole book is about. So,
well, again, Kieran, I like the word irresistible. It is. I mean, as soon as the title that appear, I have to say that it was rather enticing to say, of course, we don't understand the spiritual life of Albert Einstein. So that's why it even makes it more fascinating and intriguing to understand and explore more. But the next part I want to focus on is in your book that you talk about that Einstein categorized the evolution of religious thoughts into three phases: is fear, morality, and cosmic religious feelings. I want to focus on the word morality. How, from your research, and also based on what you discovered, how did Einstein view the word morality? I mean, again, we're talking about a scientist who dedicated his entire life to the scientific advancement and also for the human revolution. But when it comes to spirituality, I think too often, even today, we're from the secular perspective, morality has a lot more to do with human actions or even to do with interpretation of human behaviors. So going back to the question from Albert Einstein's perspective in your book, how did he understand the word morality? And what does that mean, especially when he says, or what you wrote, that morality played a bigger role in this whole phases, or as at least one of the phases in this chapter? Your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two parts to that. One of them is, like you said, he called the sort of second phase of religion, the moral religions. And what he meant by that was all of our religions that we, for people follow today. So, Western religions, Eastern religions. And I think the key of what he understood by that was these are religions that sort of claim some kind of divine revelation or a divine teacher who gave us the kind of rules of how to live, how we should behave, what ethics we should follow. And usually they're written down in some book, whether it's the Bible or the Buddhist canon or the Quran. And we sort of have the ethics given to us by God or by one of his prophets. And that's it's all over, we kind of have the truth, we have the rules. And the goal in life, if you're a religious person, is to sort of follow those rules and live up to them and, obey what's been handed down to us from the tradition. Einstein understood it very differently. Of course, he didn't believe in any of our standard religions. And what he talked about with the third phase, which was what he called cosmic religion, was very much in the same way that his physics was trying to come up with universal equations and universal field theories that would understand the entire cosmos at the same time. He wanted to try to hone in on a universal ethics that everyone in the world could follow that would sort of tie in with his universal religion and a universal science all at the same time. And that's a huge, huge topic of what his ethics was, which we could dive into if you want. But I think to sort of just bring it down to the basics, he was always looking for oneness, like I said, with the cosmos and, oneness in terms of the universal ethical rules we would follow. And so his idea of it was that we are all part of one thing. We're all part of the same cosmos. We're all conscious beings that have our own desires and fears. And so the sort of natural implication of seeing all things as one and having universal standard is that you treat other people with compassion, you treat animals with compassion. And so it becomes an ethics of nonviolence and sort of tolerance for others. And that was really the foundation of his ethical worldview. And I think maybe the best way to sum that up is, Gandhi was kind of his idol, the person he sort of held up as, the greatest living saint, the greatest ethical exemplar in our time, because he never wanted it to be totally abstract. He wanted real examples of the things that he talked about and emphasized in his religion. So yeah, I think that's kind of the crux of his ethics, was a universal system that everyone could follow that was really focused on nonviolence.
Kieran, let's bring another aspect into our conversation, which is related to the word emotion. We know that across all religions, it's not just about, it's beyond the word faith. It's beyond the word that dedication of the personal, religious devotion. Another aspect is the emotion. And we know that, for example, as Christians or even as Buddhist followers, a lot of moments that had to do with personal emotional understanding or the emotional engagement with the religion. So from your perspective, again, going back to your book, how did that Albert Einstein, that emphasis on this emotional experiences into his spiritual journey? I mean, in other words, scientific, I mean, you are a neuroscientist, and you know that when it comes to science or when it comes to scientific evidence, these are just facts. And I mean, regardless you like it or not, in a secular way to say, hey, like it or not, but these are the facts. But when it comes to spiritual journey, it's not just about 1 + 1 = 2. It's not just about that we need to get the evidence right, because this emotion could fluctuate back and forth, or emotion can go in one way or another. So how do you think that Albert Einstein understood this emotional entanglement in the spiritual realm or in the spiritual exploration? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is one of my favorite parts of his sort of religious spiritual view is that he also recognized that a sort of a dominant emotional tone is tied to every religion, and a lot of them are based on fear, and that was kind of his
Mm.
his first phase is fear of gods that are going to harm us or evil spirits and so on, and then that continues through the second phase where there's fear of punishment in hell, fear of offending God or not living up to the moral standards. And he had a pretty radical way of looking at it and said the primary emotion should be wonder. It
Mm.
should be awe. If you're really paying attention, like a good physicist is, and looking around at the incredible cosmos we live in and the laws that govern it somehow that are always effective and that apply everywhere, and that there's never a glitch, nothing ever breaks down. It's just the universe functions seamlessly at all times. Anyone who's really looking at that should be really astonished and just in awe of the natural order and in awe of the cosmos we live in. So that's how he sort of sold it, is that this is the dominant emotion we should be feeling is actually wonder. And I think what is really even more interesting than that for me is that he couples that with curiosity. So that emotion of kind of awe and reverence can easily be abused, and it has been in many religions. And Einstein pointed out it's also abused in political systems, and that was most obvious for him with Nazism and Hitler in his time. And Hitler was basically adored by the people as this godlike figure,
Mm.
a Superman in the Nietzschean sense, who was going to save Germany and lead people to some glorious future. So that emotion is extremely powerful, but it can also be taken advantage of very easily. And so what Einstein said is you need to couple that with curiosity. And that's another powerful, not quite emotion, but a drive that he saw as almost like a sacred impulse. I think he called it a mystical drive to understand the cosmos. And when you put those two things together, you have the critical thinking that comes with curiosity and the sort of intellectual integrity required to be a curious mind, but you have also the what he considered kind of the right fundamental emotion in terms of how we relate to the rest of the universe. And so I think it's like I said, one of my favorite things about his spirituality, and I think really original take. And I'll just add that he was aware, and I point out in the book too, that this is not something totally new with him. This is actually how Aristotle and Plato defined philosophy. Basically, the real philosopher is someone who is in awe of the world and who can't help but just wonder about the world we're living in and what's going on and where did it all come from. So
Well, Kieran, surely we're living in a rather complicated, or even, I dare to say, even more complicated world today. I mean, again, we're looking at the advancement of artificial intelligence, and we're looking at the intricacy of human relationship. And on top of all that, that we're still seeing this debate between religion and also the scientific advancement. Now, I want to move on to the next topic regarding two words: free will. I mean, we know that when it comes to religion, this has been one of the most heated and the most controversial topics within the religious field. People believe that regardless if you're Christians or if you're Buddhist followers or however the religion or Hindu, that free will has been something that it was rather difficult to be defined. As a matter of fact, that I remember that a couple years ago, I when I travel around the world and I was able to got into a conversation with a couple scholars that they came from different religious backgrounds, and needless to say, the conversation on free will, it was just heated. And again, no one was really can put the fingers on this pie to say, hey, this is the ultimate or universal definition. So, but coming back to Albert Einstein, how did Albert Einstein, or based on your discovery and also your research, how did Albert Einstein understand the definition of free will? So in other words, how did he interpret free will? And also, how did he, I would say, interpret or even to translate that the existence of free will and also human individual responsibilities? Your thoughts?
yeah, and that's a thorny topic for him because he was very open about being a determinist who didn't believe in free will at all, and this rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. It is, as you're saying, it's a pretty fundamental issue for most religions that despite bad luck or bad genes or influence from the devil or whatever it might be. We ultimately have freedom and we're responsible for our choices. And I think it's a conundrum too, because he really did push for people to live up to this very high standard and to be compassionate and nonviolent. And he worked, endlessly for world peace and nuclear disarmament. So he
That's
was very
right.
much an active person searching to improve the world and also pushing individuals to live up to a very high ethical standard. And yet at the same time, he said there's really no freedom. And he really stood firm on that his whole life. He never sort of changed his mind. And that was actually a very hard chapter of the book to write, because it's so hard to reconcile those two things. That someone who clearly seems to believe that humans can change the course of history, and yet says that on a metaphysical, philosophical way, we're completely determined. Everything's been decided ahead of time. I think I might disappoint you, but I'll have to tell you what I wrote in the book, which is, I thought, maybe someone is a genius like Einstein, maybe we can hope that he was able to resolve this or make some kind of progress on this issue we've been fighting about for thousands of years. And I say in the book, prepare to be disappointed, because if you actually read what he wrote, he kind of muddles along and contradicts himself a lot. And I think he was very committed to this idea philosophically, and yet he also had comments which he made, which I sort of dug up here and there, and I put into that chapter on morality and ethics and freedom, that the way he saw it is the sort of default state is we're automatons and we're determined. We let our genes and our impulses and our instincts drive us, and our culture sort of determines how we believe, or what we believe and how we feel about things. And that's kind of the default state of a human being. But what he did hit on, which is really interesting, I think, and is shared by a lot of spiritual traditions, is that you can overcome that through conscious effort, through spiritual practice of some kind. And that's the way I think he saw it in the end. Even if he wanted to commit to this sort of philosophical stance that we can't make any change, he did actually say, he did admit a little bit that, through conscious striving, through effort, through, rational understanding, we can sort of transcend our default behaviors, our genes, whatever our predispositions are, and attain some degree of freedom. So I think that's kind of the probably not too satisfying answer to that question, but he did struggle with it a lot. And yeah.
Well, Kieran, as the saying goes, regardless if you are a scientist or if you are a scholar, but ultimately humans are not perfect. I mean, again, that's one of the hardest and one of the most difficult questions. I mean, again, it's not just for Albert Einstein, it's for everyone to interpret free will. And what does that mean individually? I mean, again, we're looking at the intricacy of the religious web today. I mean, for centuries, I mean, as you mentioned before, Kieran, we can trace it all the way back to Aristotle and also, all those Roman period. But the truth is, it's still something that we're wrestling with. And that's the beauty of human being, is challenge our intellectual capacity. Now, I want to wrap up our conversation by asking you the last question. Again, the book is called I Am Part of Infinity, The Spiritual Journey of Albert Einstein. Now, Kieran, from your perspective, what would you expect the readers to understand when we finish reading the last chapter of this book? And again, as I mentioned before, I'm still in the process of digesting what you have written in the book. It's a lot more content. It's a lot more complicated than I thought, but it's enjoyable. I mean, that's part of it. So you as an author, and giving your scientific background as a neuroscientist, what would you expect the readers to appreciate, especially coming back to such a well-known and a popular figure in this beyond the scientific field like Albert Einstein? Your final thoughts.
Yeah, great question. What's the takeaway? I'll just start by saying I'm really glad you were sort of grabbed by the title. It's actually a direct quote from Einstein. And as soon as I read those words in one of his many talks, I knew that was the title of the book right away. And what I love about it is that reading the title, it's in the first person, actually, you might have noticed. So to read the title is to say the take-home message and the meaning of the entire book, which is that you too, I and you are a part of infinity. And that's what he meant by that, is that every little piece, every human, every atom, every plant, everything is part of one larger whole, including you, including the reader, and so on. So I think I love that you can't read the title without sort of saying the message out loud to yourself. And I think the take home from that is there's many ways to express that as well. And that's kind of how I closed the book, is that Einstein's way was, doing physics and pushing for world peace and, controlling nuclear weapons. That's how he saw the expression. But that doesn't mean that's the only way. And I think one thing I love is that he often said, if I weren't a physicist, I would have been a musician. And that's kind of how he saw this, the other highest expression of the underlying order of the eternal beauty of the universe was through music. But if you look at who he actually admired the most and who he kind of revered as his heroes, they were also very different people who expressed things different ways. And so Gandhi, for example, sort of felt this connection to a larger whole, but he expressed it through political action, and sort of a mass religious spiritual movement, an independence movement. Other people he admired were philosophers who he wrote very dense books, but, they didn't do any science. They weren't involved in politics. And so that's how I close the book, is that it's really what I hope people will get from it is that sense and maybe a deeper pursuit of feeling that direct connection to the larger whole. But then it's up to you. It's really up to the individual. How do you express that? How do you download what you've experienced or what you felt and put it out into the world, whether that's through art or through science or through your, religious practice or writing philosophy, whatever the case may be. So.
Well, again, Kieran, this is such a good read. Of course, not only that the book is about Albert Einstein, but also throughout our conversations that you amazingly and also thoroughly explain the complication of the spiritual journey that, within the Albert Einstein's field. Again, we know that he's a scientist, but as you said, his life and his mesmeration is beyond the scientific evidence. It's more than that. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, it's such an honor to talk to Dr. Kieran Fox, and his new book is called I Am Part of Infinity, The Spiritual Journey of Albert Einstein. So, Dr. Fox, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. And again, I can't wait to continue my reading. And I hope that more people will connect with you and also through this amazing book to understand more about Einstein and also his spiritual journey. So thank you so much for doing this.